Let's dive into the specific assertions, kind of explore them a little bit. First, we have inquiry and inspection of records. We got to love these examples, right? Real practical examples of what you could see, maybe in the real world as well as on the exam. The following here are examples of how an auditor would conduct testing through inquiry and inspection. Let's say an auditor decides to test the controller's review of the bank rec. Okay, interesting point. This is not the auditor actually testing the bank rec. This is the auditor testing how well the controller reviews the bank rec. So this is testing an internal control. Big difference there. You're not physically testing how well this is done. You're testing how well the company, let's say, monthly reviews this. The auditor interviews the controller in order to understand the specific data reviewed on the reconciliation. The auditor also verifies that the bank rec is properly prepared by the staff accountant and reviewed by the controller as evidenced by their respective sign-offs. Now, if the auditor was just testing the bank rec, they might reperform it, right? They might do some recalculation. But here, this is inquiry and inspection because you're inquiring and trying to inspect how well this is actually reviewed. Next up, we can determine whether the aging categories on the aged accounts payable trial balance are accurate or the aged accounts receivable trial balance. And lastly, obtaining a letter from the client's legal counsel to identify any outstanding material contingencies that is going to be inquired. Confirmations. This is one of the ones we beat to death, but it's pretty important, right? Definitely something to take note of. Following are examples of how an auditor would conduct testing through confirmation. The auditor would send out letters to third parties, such as customers, to confirm AR balances, vendors to confirm AP balances, etc., and request information about the client that should match up with what the client has in its own records. The auditor would then review the responses to confirm the accuracy of the information that was provided by the client. Talk about this. This goes very much in hand with the revenue cycle, expenditure cycle, cash cycle, inventory cycle, all of those. So yeah, if you want additional help, definitely revisit those. If you're going in order and you would have seen them already, but if not, go back and check them out. Request and review a list of the entity's customers from the accounting department. Make sure it's a complete list through which you can then send confirmations to. Contact a sample of the entity's customers to confirm that they've actually done business with the entity and to inquire about the terms of the transactions. If you call them up and no one answers, it could be, a fake customer they listed, and listing fake business, that's obviously definitely a concern. You could review the entity's bank statements and confirm that deposits listed on the bank statements are from the actual entity's customers. And lastly, review the entity's AR aging report and confirm that the balances shown are actually owed by the entity's customers. All great ways of confirmation. Here is a sample confirmation form. Pretty great here. This is confirmation for the bank. So this is confirming the cash account. So to the manager, right, name, all of that. Balance confirmation as of March 31st, whatever year it is, dear sir or madam. Kindly confirm the balances as on 31st of March, whatever year it is, for the following, which is required for our annual financial audit purposes. Yeah, you see right here. Well, you've got a couple accounts that exist, and you want to confirm that. But then here you kind of say, okay, any letters of credits that exist, any bank guarantees, basically anything else. You could include many other, you could also say, number 7, any other financial transactions that exist between you and the audit client. So this is really an opportunity for you to understand any sort of business that is being done between the bank and the client, which could potentially lead you to discover other items. Kindly do the needful. It's a little stuffy and formal for my taste, but hey, yours faithfully. Yeah, but this is kind of what you'd use. We're not really testing on what the proper greeting is for a letter, but if you've got anything there, I'd love to hear it. Talking about examples of observation, the following are examples of how the auditor would conduct testing through observation. You could observe the client's personnel performing an internal control procedure. This would be test of controls. We could observe the warehouse supervisor counting the goods delivered before signing the delivery note from the supplier. These are phenomenal tests to make sure that the business process is functioning properly. We could observe the interaction between employees and managers. If we see tension somewhere, we might be able to deduce that, okay, the managers are trying to get the employees to commit fraud. I mean, that's jumping to conclusions, but obviously just generally observing the interactions with employees and managers, you might be able to pick something up, and in your experience, you may have discovered some other issues. Observing employees as they perform their job duties, seeing if they're diligently performing their duties. If you see a whole department slacking off, you might want to audit that and perform more substantive procedures for that department more diligently. And lastly, observing the use of equipment and resources. Bunch of great opportunities to test observation. Moving on to reperformance and recalculation, what are some examples how an auditor would use these methods to test? Well, for reperformance, you could test the operating effectiveness of a bank reconciliation control. How do you do that? You reperform the bank reconciliation, right? You just redo whatever they did. So it's pretty broad. You can redo any report, redo any spreadsheet, any schedule that was made by any of the accountants within the company. Recalculation, you could determine the mathematical accuracy of costs on an invoice sent to a customer. Simple, what's the price? How many units did they buy? Any other additional fees? Just re-performing any mathematical accuracy, anything like that. Testing the amount of FICA tax withheld from an employee's paycheck while withholding extra FICA amounts from an employee's paycheck may not be, in the best interest for anyone. Maybe someone's doing it to misappropriate assets, steal some cash. Anyway, you just want to make sure that all of the significant material accounts are not materially misstated. Keep in mind that procedures such as recalculation are checking the mathematical accuracy of items to identify errors both from mistakes and fraud. Definitely something you want to keep in mind. Both are just as important because both could materially misstate the financial statements. Testing the cash balance, right? Cash is going to be such an important account to test. The auditor's approach for combining testing of controls and details of cash is to first assess control risk and then to test both controls and details of cash. Makes sense, right? You want to make sure that the entire cash process is set and then the numbers are actually correct. The auditor would assess control risk by looking at how the organization's controls are designed and implemented and whether they are effective in preventing or detecting errors or fraud. Obviously, if they're maintained properly, the auditor would then test both controls and details of cash by performing procedures such as inspecting documentation, observing the process, and testing any transactions. How are you going to test controls for cash? You are going to check the completeness of cash receipts for cash sales, making sure that they're all properly accounted for. The auditor would observe the consistency of the employee's use of cash registers. If this company does have cash registers in physical locations with employees collecting cash, you obviously want to take note in how employees are utilizing those. Also, you want to test the controls in place over the cash receipts and disbursement process. Are there proper methods for authorization in place, or can someone just put cash in and take cash out whenever they want? Next, you're going to test the actual cash account balance, which is known as test of details, substantive procedures. You're going to perform analytical procedures on the actual cash balance, and you're going to review the bank statements and reconcile them to the cash balance per the books. That's going to be our bank rec. For the valuation assertion, really one of the best ways for testing the valuation assertion, that's going to relate very heavily to accounts receivable. The collectability of accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is listed at $10 million, let's say. However, if they have a major customer that just went bankrupt who owed them $3 million, but they didn't write that down, you as the auditor should say, all right, your customer just went bankrupt. You're probably not going to receive $3 million. So we want to reassess that valuation of your asset of accounts receivable and lower it now to $7 million. That's something that would be important to take note. This assertion includes ensuring that assets, liabilities, and equity interests are recorded fairly and at appropriate amounts, and that any adjustments to valuation are properly recorded. This could go with accounts receivable, could be PP&E, writing that down, obsolete inventory, anything like that. Completeness assertion, as we mentioned, completeness is very much tied to tracing, which means working from the supporting evidence, which is the original source documents, to the accounting records. Because if something's missing from the accounting records, which means it's incomplete, you're not going to be able to look in the accounting records and then bring it to the source documents because it's not going to be there. You got to start from the source documents and bring it to the accounting records. And then just a reminder to memorize that occurrence is related to vouching. Testing the existence and occurrence assertions. Well, this assertion includes ensuring that that the items included on the financial statements exist. What are we going to do here? We're going to use confirmations to prove the existence of the accounts receivable. And keep in mind that confirmations, like many other procedures, will also test additional assertions. So one test, such as confirmations, can test for multiple assertions, such as completeness and evaluation, because you're going to confirm the value of those receivables. It's going to help you significantly. Obviously, for valuation, you're going to do other processes as well. Now, vouching, which means working from the accounting records to the supporting evidence, make sure that, hey, is this accounts receivable listed on your financial statements, does that actually exist? Well, you're going to go look for audit evidence through source documents. Rights and obligations. This assertion is going to cover that the entity has the legal rights to all of the assets included on the balance sheet, and that all obligations currently owed are included on the balance sheet as liabilities. What are some activities involved here? Well, contract review is actually definitely a big one. The auditor would test the client's compliance with the terms of the contract by examining the client's records related to the contract. This is going to be any contract that they're in, which could have future liabilities. If you enter into a 20-year contract for, let's say, leasing a building, obviously there's going to be significant liabilities there because, well, the point of the contract is that you are agreeing to pay rent for the next 20 years, let's say. This would include reviewing the client's documentation of the contract, such as the signed agreement, as well as the client's records of performance under the contract. The auditor would also review any correspondence between the client and the other party to the contract to ensure that the client has fulfilled its obligations. Finally, the auditor would interview the client's employees who are responsible for managing it to ensure that they're aware of the terms and are in compliance. So again, you are, let's say, again, the client is leasing a building for 20 years. You want to make sure that any obligations with that lease are properly recorded. Lastly, here you can examine documents and records to verify that the client has the rights to the assets that it's actually using, that they didn't steal these pieces of equipment, that you actually see the purchase documents and prove that they actually bought them and they're using them properly. The auditor's use of irrelevant assertions, let's talk about that. Well, there may be more than one testing area related to the same assertion, like we mentioned, such as testing both inventory on hand and inventory in transit in order to assess the completeness assertion. You want to make sure that inventory is complete. And with that being said, well, inventory can be on hand, right? It can be sitting in your warehouse, but then it could also be in transit on its way to the customer. And if you're familiar with, it's all throughout the other exams as well, FOB shipping point and destination. Let's say FOB destination, those are the terms. So here is the customer, right? You're shipping inventory to the customer. If you have terms FOB destination, the inventory actually doesn't change hands legally until it reaches the destination. So if on 12/31, the inventory is still en route, you should include that inventory in your inventory balance. Very important there because you're going to test all the inventory for that's included in the warehouse as well as that's in transit. I had a sim on this when oh man, this is a sim I was practicing and it kept getting me. It's about, definitely a shout out to check out the ASCPA practice exam online. We've got links to it as well on our site. It's there. It's been there for years. A wonderful sim for practice, but it gets me every time. And, there's widgets and you got to count the widgets that are in the warehouse as well as the widgets that are in transit. Consider if they should be included in the inventory count. It's very complex. Definitely recommend checking that out. Very important sim. Additionally, there may be more than one testing activity to support the same assertion, such as testing, shipping, and receiving cutoff procedures, and observing physical inventory counts in order to assess the completeness assertion. Makes sense there. Lastly here, a single auditing procedure or single test can provide evidence for more than one assertion, right? We're drilling this down. I know it says it multiple times, but this is something that I have physically seen with my own eyes. So many people struggle with throughout. So, for example, observing inventory counts provides evidence for the completeness assertion that all inventory on hand is included in the account balance, and existence. Does all inventory listed on the balance sheet actually exist? Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.